You're the host.
I got it. Yep. There we go. I see people coming in. Hey folks, thanks for jumping on. I'm going to give folks a moment or two to get signed in here. The attendee list already starting to grow. So welcome, happy Thursday. We'll get started in a moment. All right, just a moment or two, a moment longer, and we'll jump in. I would imagine there'll be some people trickling in here over the next few minutes. So at 6:03, we'll go ahead and get started. Sorry, 12:03.
I was going to say 6:03. That's
my clock is still on the other time zone. 12:03. Don't expect everyone to sit here for 6 hours.
Yeah, an awkward silence. Then we'll get going.
Yeah, right. All righty, let's go ahead and jump in. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the first ever XenTegra Florida user group. So my name is Darren Perry. I am the Chief Client Executive at XenTegra, responsible for the overall growth and territory of Florida. With me on the line from XenTegra is Patrick Toner. Patrick, you want to say hi real quick?
Sure. How's everybody doing? My name is Patrick Toner. I'm a solutions architect here at XenTegra. I joined back in November and really happy to be here on the Florida user group. I actually just moved here from the Philly area. So I'm a brand new Floridian, although I will tell everybody, full stop right up front that I live in Northeast Florida. I believe that's considered South Georgia to some. So you may accept me, you may not, but I'm glad to be here today. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Thanks, Patrick. So here's a brief agenda of what we're going to cover today. We're going to have a couple presentations from Tanium and Deep Instinct. We'll have a demonstration of the integration between the two technologies, and then we'll have an open Q&A session. So a bit of housekeeping here prior to getting started. For those of you that are attending and not panelists, so all of our awesome customers and prospective customers on here, you guys are going to be getting an email in the next 10-15 minutes with your Grubhub voucher. Important, it's a voucher, not a gift card. So the reason why we did that is to prevent people from just coming to get a free lunch and not pay attention at all. So to be appreciative of your time and attention during lunch, we wanted to buy lunch for you. So be on the lookout for that Grubhub voucher, and that way you can get yourself something to eat here after the session is over. If there are any questions that come up along the way, feel free to enter them in the chat or enter them, possibly a Q&A type of button, but just go ahead and enter those in the chat. I will moderate the chat, and then we'll ask questions of the various presenters here, and then we'll continue. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So some of you might know who XenTegra is. You might be working with us, current clients today. You might have worked with us in the past, or you don't know who we are, but we've been in business for just over 10 years. We actually celebrated our 10-year anniversary on June 30th. We're headquartered in Charlotte, but we have national and international reach with offices in the Caribbean and in Canada. Andy Whiteside was our founder and CEO, former Microsoft Citrix administrator and engineer, started the company to really create a community. So these are quotes directly pulled from him, and this is what he is most passionate about. And it trickled down, all the way to, the engineers, the admins, the salespeople. We really believe that reinvestment and enablement in the client and customer community can really help create something pretty special. And I'm super excited to be able to do our first ever Florida user group, and appreciate for you guys joining us here. So without further ado, we've got some presenters here. So I want to introduce Matt from Tanium, Jonathan from Deep Instinct, and Derek from Tanium. They're going to be going through the presentation today. And I think you guys have your cameras up, so awesome. So you can see these are not just stock clip art pictures. These are actually real people. So thank you guys for joining us, and let's go ahead and get started. Matt, you are up.
That sounds good. So I'm actually, I'm off video. I had a hotspot here in a hotel room, so apologies for going off camera. I just want to make sure that it was a clear connection here. So thanks again, everybody, for joining. Thank you so much for XenTegra for putting this together. You guys have been a great partner. For those I haven't met, my name is Matt Stiles. I'm the partner director for the Southeast at Tanium. Really have enjoyed working with XenTegra. They've really dove in both on the MSP side as well as the software resale side and become one of our go-to partners here in the Southeast. So thank you again. Just a brief history on Tanium for those that might not be familiar. I talk to a lot of partners and customers that still ask the question, who is Tanium? And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, if you look at the history of Tanium, we really built the business on the largest accounts in the world. And as you can see here, being in the lion's share of the Fortune 100, a lot of the big banks, and really the thesis of the company was, we went to the largest accounts in the world and said, how many laptops, desktops, basically all your endpoints with an operating system, how many do you have? Where are they? What are they doing? What software is running on them? And we found that a lot of customers really couldn't definitively answer those questions. So that was really the thesis of the company. And we started with visibility and control. And if you want to go to the next slide, in terms of the evolution of Tanium, this is what's really interesting and exciting, is that if you look at what ServiceNow did for workflow, Palo Alto Networks in terms of collapsing IDS, IPS, all those firewall features into what Gartner then called next generation firewalls. Nutanix, same thing with hyperconvergence in the data center. We've now been acknowledged by Gartner in conjunction with our chief marketing officer in the past 3 months that Tanium has created a brand new category called Converged Endpoint Management. We're the very first company that has collapsed a lot of these point solution tools across risk, compliance, security, and operations into a single platform. And if you want to go to the next slide. However, the one thing that Tanium has said from day one is that we did not want to be an XDR solution. So if you look at a lot of the competition out there, we are not trying to go compete with the CrowdStrikes of the world. That is not what our bread and butter is. And that's why I'm so excited to be working with Deep Instinct and XenTegra, that's now closing this little gap we had from the XDR standpoint and prevention on that piece. So with that, I would let the smart guys talk. I'd love to pass it over to Jonathan to talk more about Deep Instinct and show you guys what this looks like.
All right, Jonathan.
Great if I got off of mute. Hey, thanks, Matt. I just wanted to say I'm Jonathan Adair. I'm part of the engineering team here at Deep Instinct. I think every product that we look at in the industry that's newly created, that's trying to innovate, is trying to innovate for a massive reason. And if this slide encompasses anything, it's the reason, it's the why. And when I say the why, I mean, today with current machine learning endpoint solutions, we're stuck in a situation of assumed breach on an emphasis on trying to figure out what happens after the breach and how much time does it take to recover from that. And Deep Instinct malware prevention is really focused on, how about if we never let it, like, never had a breach, never have a breach, malware never lands on disk, it can't do any damage. And so the problem statement here that we're seeing is that we've seen in industry, and why Deep Instinct was created, was simply because in a second and a half of malware landing on disk, ransomware and other kinds of malware begin to take and spread like wildfire. And you see in 3 seconds that happens. In 15 to 20 seconds, new systems start to become infected. Attackers start to move laterally. Full encryption starts to happen. And then for months after that, we're doing investigation remediation. All of this because we let malware land on disk. If I could accompany or if I could encompass anything that we're talking about today, it would be that Deep Instinct's focus is to never allow malware to land on disk in any scenario. And this includes unknown malware that we've never seen in the wild. So we'll talk a little bit about that coming up of how we do that, what we promise. Next slide, please. Today, you go ahead and build this out for me, just one click. Today we focus on the two gray areas. So let's talk about the gray areas first. Endpoint protection. So we are definitely a replacement for any traditional AV, legacy AV that you're currently using that is relying on traditional technologies such as heuristics and hashes. We do this through deep learning and creating a neural network of deep learning that basically ends up becoming a brain. It's just like the Tesla brain for cars that understands the difference between a cat and a dog, between a stop sign and a yield sign, and those type of things. We've created a brain for malware specifically. And that's not just for bad malware, but for good malware, so that we understand the difference between what is malicious and what is benign. It's very important for reducing false positives. We have a massive problem in this endpoint protection space with either too much protection or too many false positives or not enough real detections, several different areas of issue. We're here to fix all of that through deep learning. We're here, again, I know this is going to be a very short presentation, but we'd love the opportunity to explain more about what deep learning does, and how we train the brain, and show a demo of that at a further point. We also focus today on if you have a custom application that needs a new approach to your document uploads and that type of thing for applications, we're certainly the one for that as well. And we integrate through APIs at the application layer to, in a great scenario is a front-end web server having PDFs and docs uploaded all day. We're providing a really, really high efficacy and low false positive in sub 20 millisecond response times in deciding whether those files are malicious or benign. We do that in the endpoint space and in the agentless, what we call agentless deep instinct for application space. Both of those are taking advantage of the deep learning brain. And if you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so these three are the three big pillars that I could spend probably the next 30 minutes on. But I think the key in understanding this is you can choose any endpoint protection product. There's a lot of them. And what we do in all of our proof of values is we show these three things in action, right? Because obviously in PowerPoint, everything works. So the first thing we're going to start off with is we're going to promise you that we're going to stop unknown zero-day threats, things were solved that are just seen today in the wild for the first time. That's impossible with legacy technologies and legacy views of how to attack that. Our deep learning brain, of which I'm using a version from January, just this week prevented a 6-hour unknown malware variant that we had never seen before. That's the power of feeding a neural network brain engine billions and billions of malicious and benign files so that it understands what's real. With that, we understand the DNA of the file itself and the DNA of things like PowerShell, what it's trying to accomplish, what it's if it's malicious, we're going to shut it down. We have a behavioral analysis part of our brain that shuts down the behavior piece, not just the actions of a static analysis in a file analysis. We're going to promise a 99% efficacy on unknown threats, things we've never seen, just like we saw this week. I've got a video of that I'd love to pass along if anybody's interested. Sub 20 millisecond prevention. That's 5 times faster than we can blink an eye. We prevent malware from ever landing. If you click on a file within sub 20 milliseconds, that file will never land on disk and be shut down in memory. It's just that fast. We're not dependent on cloud connectivity or any type of connectivity for efficacy. Obviously, we have some cloud verdict type tie-ins that help us deeply classify what the maliciousness is, but we're not relying on it for high efficacy and low false positives. So with that, it means that you can zip up a file, you get on a train or a plane and feel protected, that no matter what happens, whether you're connected or not, we're going to prevent malware live. And that's something we also show in all of our demos. And then the last three things, again, we back all these promises up with a $3 million ransomware warranty. If you get infected with ransomware running Deep Instinct, this money can be used not to pay the ransom, but to help to remediate and all the things that go along with cleaning up a mess that we should prevent in the first place, which is why we put our money where our mouth is here. Also, industry's only false positive warranty of 0.1%. Imagine reducing your noise and your socks to 0.1% false positives, so that you can focus on the things that matter and not the things that are noise. And all that while giving you much better TCO and ROI than any product on the market. And again, all this could be proven very easily with some time in a demo, some time in a proof of value. And I just want to speak quickly, I got a couple of minutes left, to our integration with Tanium, which Derek's going to go into deeply. But that is a true engineering marriage where our agents communicate with one another, where we feed that threat response module. And it's not just some type of OEM that we say is an OEM. There's true engineering work that's went on with that. And at this point in time, I will point it over to Derek so he can show the magic. Thanks all.
Exactly. All right. So before you get started here, man, if folks have questions along the way through the demonstration, if you could just enter them in the chat, I will go ahead and moderate. And once the demonstration is over, we'll go ahead and open up the floor to Derek and Matt and Jonathan to address the questions. So with that said, let me stop sharing my screen, Derek, and you should be good to go, man.
All right. Share out my desktop. Can everyone see the Tanium console?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Well, as mentioned before, my name is Derek Carver. I am a technical engineer with Tanium. I've been with Tanium coming up on 6 years this year. I've worked with previous security vendors such as FireEye, Carbon Black, Blue Code, F5. And so I've been in the security focused space for quite some time. I've been in the IT industry for about 20 plus years. And I'm telling you, if I had the ability to do what Tanium can do previously to coming to Tanium, it would have made my life so much easier. As Matt mentioned in his introduction about Tanium, it was started around 2006, 2007, and we're in stealth mode for 5 years developing this new platform where the father-son team that started Tanium started a company called Big Fix, you might be familiar with, and all the issues and problems they ran into with scale and flexibility and the ability to just get information immediately. They said there's got to be a better way to solve that problem. And so they spent 5 years in developing the Tanium platform. And it truly is a platform. It's a single agent that resides on the endpoint and allows you to do a host, a multitude of things. I was actually at an event last night and I had 2 different people come to me talking about Tanium, specifically because they've had customers say, I need one tool that can do a host of different things, not a conglomeration or a mishmash of multiple point solutions that are potentially causing problems and agent bloat on the endpoint. And that's truly one of the things Tanium solves, is the ability to ask those questions like Matt mentioned earlier. How many endpoints do you have in your environment? And answer them within seconds. So we have this little explore data area. We call it interact. So if I go to interact, it's just a way to interact with your environment. And so it's just a simple way of asking questions. So if I type in computer name and let's say IP address and let's say operating system, and I typoed the word operating, and I did that on purpose to show that Tanium will kind of figure out, just like Google will when you mistype something in a Google search, Tanium will actually figure out kind of what and suggest questions for you to be able to answer, to get answers for. And so in my lab environment here that I'm demoing, we have just over 1,000 systems or so. And in the 8 to 10 seconds I was talking, you can see that all the endpoints in the environment came back with their computer name, their IP address, and their operating system. And what's unique about this is not me querying a database. It's me asking, because of the speed and scale of the platform and how it works, it's me asking every endpoint to respond back to this question. And so what makes it powerful is it's real-time data. It's what's happening right now on the endpoint. And it makes it very powerful for when you want to ask things like, I want to know what running processes there are in my environment, but I also want to know the running processes with maybe a hash value as well. So let's just ask for MD5 hash, or you could do SHA-1 or SHA-256. But what's unique about this is I'm asking every endpoint right now to surface the running processes in their environment with the hash value of that endpoint. And from that perspective, I'm able to see every endpoint process running. And you'll see that this total count is 5,800 something, and it's going to continue to go up as we get responses back in. But what that is that's 1,100 unique ones for a total of 7,000, over 7,000. So Tanium actually puts this count in on the right hand side, and I can actually sort by that count, and now I can see kind of what my outliers are. And if there's something like, let's say for instance, there's a bash version of a malware that's running around masquerading as bash, I can just filter here on bash, and then I can see the majority of the bash installs have this hash value with them, but several of these others are outliers, and that might be something unique going on there that I need to go and do a little more investigation. So there's 5 that returned with this one. I can check that line item, and I can drill down and ask more questions just specifically of those 5 endpoints, like what's your computer name and who was the last logged in user? Or I can take action as well. So I can deploy an action to say, hey, I know that matches a malware hash value. I want to be able to apply an IPsec quarantine to those endpoints. And so being able to do that on the fly allows you to be able to quarantine, whether that's 5 or 5,000 endpoints. I can reach out and quarantine all of those within just a short period of time and moments, simply because each action is going to be dynamic and in near real time as that gets pushed out. Or maybe I just want to reach out and kill that process. So I have the ability to not only ask the questions, but to immediately pivot and take action. How many of you ever have wanted to know who's making a connection out to this IP address on the internet? That's something that seems like a simple question to answer, but you might have to go to router logs or firewall logs or trying to figure out who's making these connections. And heaven forbid, with COVID and work from home, you're not even going to know where those are connected to because they're connecting through their own internet connection. But with Tanium, I can ask just IP connections. Tell me who's connecting to what, and whether the endpoints are at home or at a coffee shop, at a hotel Wi-Fi conference, every endpoint that's connected to the network is going to respond back to this question, and it's going to return all of the IP connections for each of those endpoints. And so from there, I'm able to see not only the source port and destination, source port and source IP, but also the destination IP and port, and what process that's associated with as well. So if I wanted to, I could easily filter on this. I could export this out if I needed to take this and massage the data and do some other things with it. But just getting the understanding of all endpoints, who's connecting to what, is something Tanium actually helps you do in a matter of seconds. That's truly the platform play. I'll give you a great real world example. When we had Print Nightmare came out, we had customers asking us, and we put out a blog very quickly about how we can help our customers get responses quickly out for the Print Nightmare. The recommendation was to go and stop the print services. So I just typed in this question, service details, and if I filter on the word spooler, I can find every process that's running the print spooler and what the service status of it is, and then what the startup mode is automatically. So just rebooting these systems is not going to take care of that. I can then drill down and take action to set that service to disabled, or stop the service and set the startup mode to disabled or manual. So from there, you're able to mitigate that again within seconds. And it doesn't matter where these endpoints are. Again, coffee shop, home, not on Wi-Fi, other side of the globe, you're still able to manage these endpoints. Now, what makes Tanium powerful is truly the platform play. And I like to give the example of 12 years ago, everyone had a cell phone and they were making phone calls and sending text messages. But if you wanted to go somewhere, you probably had a GPS device in your car. If you wanted to take pictures, you had a digital camera. If you wanted video, you probably had a separate video camera for that. And then when the smartphone came out, all of that kind of collapsed into that platform, and it changed the way we live our lives. And in that same way, Tanium as a platform is doing that for endpoint management. So we have multiple modules, just like you would if you want to manage your calorie intake. There's probably an app for that. So you don't go get a different device. You just install an app on your existing platform. And in that same way, because of the speed and scale of Tanium, we're able to leverage multiple modules that allow you to take care of a lot of different activities, whether it be operations or security or risk and compliance, whatever it may be. Tanium most likely has a module that meets your needs for those type of activities on the endpoint, leveraging a single endpoint. So when we get asked, Tanium, who do you compete with? It depends on which module you're talking about, because we have modules that compete with other security incident response tools. We have modules that compete with operational patching and software deployment tools. But one of the modules that, whether you're in risk or operations or security, one of the modules that everyone loves is our Discover module. And part of the reason why is because Discover allows you to take each one of the clients, the agents, the endpoints themselves, and tell it, you're going to become part of a network neighborhood watch program, if you will. And so now what I want you to do is go out and tell me all of the devices you see around you. So through different mechanisms that we leverage, we'll be able to tell you the MAC address and the manufacturer and what the host name is and the IP address, the first time we saw it, the last time we saw it, and also which ports are open. So even though there's not a Tanium client on every device that's on your network, we can still give you visibility into those devices. We had one customer that found out through Discover that all of their HP printers were being sent out with port 80 open for web management to be able to manage the printer remotely. They didn't want that. That's opening up an attack surface they didn't want to have to manage. So basically, they didn't have any visibility into that prior to. So Tanium was giving them that. You can see endpoints that have a gray Tanium logo means that they're not currently under management, but they can be managed by Tanium. The ones that have a red logo show that they are being managed by Tanium. And so the others that can't be managed by Tanium will have a little gray logo with a line through it that basically says we're seeing this information, we're seeing these switches, routers, Wi-Fi devices, whatever it may be, but we're not installing an agent on there, but we're giving you visibility into devices like Wi-Fi devices, switches, routers, other things that might be on your network. So from there, we're also able to show you different information about your managed and unmanaged devices based on location. If you wanted to take it all the way down to different cities or buildings, you could actually see a breakout of where your devices are based on the discovery mechanisms, where the devices themselves are telling you as it see things come on in the network and leave the network. We show you kind of the first time we saw it, the last time we've seen it, and then what that device looks like based on OS fingerprinting and some other things we do. So that's one module that, again, is very popular across all verticals. Another module is our comply module, leverages the same single agent and allows you to do two things. One, it allows you to look for compliance findings on your endpoint. So it'll ingest CIS benchmarks. You can adjust those to your industry standard or your standard as a company, and then scan all your endpoints to see if they've moved from those benchmarks. But the one that I find super interesting is our capabilities of being able to ingest common vulnerabilities and exposures listed, take those CVEs, and then give you a report of the findings. So we have several companies that compete with just doing that alone. But I think truly what makes Tanium powerful is we're not one device sitting there trying to scan your entire network or doing remote scanning. We're having every endpoint through the single agent check itself based on the CVEs that it's familiar with. And as we see these come in, I can then see the details around that, give you SecPod, MITRE, NIST links to tell you the impact around the attack vector, complexity of it. And then also, if there's a patch out that remediates it, what's even more powerful is I can click this button and it pivots me to the patch module, which allows me to target the endpoints that need the patch, that are missing that patch, with the correct patch that takes it to where it's the CVE is no longer a vulnerability for that endpoint. And then it would eventually drop off this report because it's no longer vulnerable. And I can easily and quickly within Tanium see all the endpoints that may have that vulnerability by simply clicking on that number. We'll show you the endpoint name, the IP address, the CVSS score that goes along with it, and what operating system we found that vulnerability on. So again, all of these reports and things are things that Tanium does with a single agent on the endpoint to allow you to easily see for visibility that you need in your environment. Now, one of the things I'd like to do is share with you the threat response module, which is where the integration goes with Tanium and Deep Instinct. And so our threat response module is our incident response tool. And it's also our tool for scanning for indicators of compromise, or IOCs. And there's 4 different ways that Tanium leverages threat response to allow you to be able to see if you have or identify compromised endpoints in your environment. Now, one of which is traditional threat intelligence. So sticks, YAR rules, OpenIOC, those type of threat intelligence things that are brought into the environment and allow you to then ingest that content, and then at Tanium speed and scale, then be able to leverage that content to look across your environment to see what might be have an IOC hit on it. A second way is through what we refer to as behavioral alerts. And behavioral alerts are different than IOCs. An IOC is one that has like a forensic fingerprint that you're actually looking for a specific IP address or a hash value or a file name or whatever, a domain name. All of those coupled together make an indicator of compromise. These things say that your endpoint could potentially be compromised. What the behavioral alerts do is we're logging everything on the endpoint from a telemetry data perspective. So all file loads, process DLL loads, process tree events, registry changes, network calls, all of those type of things are, to think of it like the black box recorder of an airline flight. We're doing that same thing individually for each endpoint in the environment. Now, what happens on the endpoint then is that all of that data that's getting recorded, that telemetry data, gets ran through Tanium signals, which is looking for not a specific indicator compromise, but looking for anomalies, things that are out of the norm, such as a PowerShell script obfuscating the command line, or making net use calls, or an Office product spawning an executable, things that are tactics, techniques, and procedures that are used, but not looking for a specific fingerprint, but looking for that activity or that anomaly that's happening. And then another way that we do it, a third way, is through reputation data. So known malicious hashes, where we will ingest the content from VirusTotal or others that you partner or potentially could partner with to check those hash values for good, bad, or unknown. And then our fourth way is our integration with partners such as Deep Instinct and Microsoft Defender, to where those alerts will be generated directly into Tanium Threat Response. And from there, you're able to leverage that to then go into and see information specific around that alert. So as I'm looking at this particular alert, I can see that the alert came from the event source is Tanium Recorder, which is our signals area. We're actually seeing the content around the data itself for any Active Directory information, what domain it's a part of, the username that's associated with it, the endpoint associated with it, IP address of the endpoint, the patch level that it's on, the OS version, and then some additional event details as well. And I can also see things like, here's the command line that was executed. And what's suspicious already is it's Splunk D, but it's running out of the public directory. So I'm already suspicious of this process, as well as it's reaching out to a server on port 888. So that immediately makes it something suspicious. And you can see then other process information that comes along as a part of the process ancestry. But I could then in turn, if I choose to, make a quarantine action to this endpoint. As I mentioned earlier, we have the ability to quarantine endpoints. I can reach out, quarantine this endpoint now, and that way I put a bubble around it. No data exfiltration of the network for data that might be on that endpoint, no lateral movement. I can do things like what's called live response, which allows us to reach out to that endpoint. If I make a live connection to that endpoint, it's going to allow me to go through and see that entire process tree of information from a process perspective, to be able to see what is in the environment. And I can then literally move around, see the children that are spawned by this particular Splunk D process. As I look at each one of these, I can see that there's content happening. So this one's doing a command with net local administrators domain, trying to do reconnaissance, figure out what's the net local group administrator. So it's looking around, seeing what's on the startup on the system. So this is really a process that's kicking off some other children processes that are just trying to do reconnaissance on the network and figure out what's around me, what do I have, where do I need to go from here? And that's all the dwell time that we hear about. And I can then look back in the process tree as well to see the parent of this process and go back through and make a determination of actually where this came from, how it got into it. So I can see one of the parents throughout this lineage is Chrome. So if I did a little digging deeper, I would then see that this particular Chrome process, someone went to most likely a drive-by of a website, downloaded some content, and then in turn it changed that. So this is where the alerts area comes in to Tanium's threat response section from, again, both indicators of compromise scanning, Tanium signals, the ability for reputation data, and then integrations with what we would refer to as third-party integrations, one of which is our integration with Deep Instinct. And what I want to do now is switch over to my lab. And in my lab, I have the agent set up behind a couple of different firewalls. I've got a Tanium server configured. And so this is separate from our demo environment because I kind of throw live malware at this. So I've really got it quarantined off. I've got Deep Instinct installed on 2 of the 3 endpoints. And then I have the Tanium client on all 3 endpoints. So here you'll see I have 3 endpoints installed. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into I have the same setup here as well. I'm going to go into threat response. And in threat response, I'm going to start in the alert section, just like I did there, just showing you kind of the general examples. And you'll see here, I have an alert. I kicked this one off just before we started the seminar. So it's 7/21, today's date, and then the time. I actually have a system here where I'm connected to my my VM, the Windows machine, and I went to this standard website. There's several out there that post recent malware. I just went to download one of the pieces of malware from this dosmalware.eu site, and as soon as I attempted to write it to disk, then the Deep Instinct alert popped up, and here you can see the Deep Instinct alert that I did earlier before this seminar started. Now that alert has populated here into threat response. I can see here's the endpoint. I could then do just like I did on the other one, start a live connection to that endpoint. But some of the nice things about the way that the integration works is you can see here, I can immediately see the source comes from a Deep Instinct, that it's a file type that was attempted to be written to disk. If I come a little further down, I can see some additional details around the alert. So here, Deep Instinct passes along information about the malware probability of whether it thinks it's a worm, or ransomware, potentially unwanted applications, a backdoor. This one, it's positive that it's spyware. So 99% sure. I have the same actions I can do, like I mentioned before. I can reach out and say, hey, Deep Instinct blocks something on this endpoint, but it's the Windows workstation. So out of just being overly safe, let's quarantine the endpoint. When that endpoint's quarantined, you still have the capabilities of reaching out to that endpoint to be able to then in turn ask further questions of it, do the forensic checking of any other things that are there. Some other nice features that you can do from here as well is I could take the hash value if I wanted to and copy that, and then I could pivot over to ask Tanium questions to say, hey, every endpoint, tell me if you have this hash value anywhere at rest on disk. And you may find that that at some point there's an endpoint that hasn't received the Deep Instinct client yet, or in some way it got stored on disk. And the Deep Instinct client wasn't there to be able to scan and catch it. So just being overly cautious and looking for that hash value is a simple, trivial task within Tanium to be able to take action and do that. One thing I wanted to mention quickly too is the ability to set up the integration is super simple. Within the Tanium threat response profile area, we have what's called configurations, which basically is just telling the endpoint how to do things like scan for IOCs or what type of alerts that you want to generate. And if I look at this particular engine that's created here for my test engine, you can see here I set Deep Instinct alerts to true. It's a checkbox. You just enable it. And basically that tells the Tanium client you're being installed on an endpoint that also has a Deep Instinct client. And what we need you to do then is communicate on a back channel between the Tanium client and the Deep Instinct client. So those alerts never leave the endpoint to be communicated to the Tanium side. They talk to each agent on that same workstation or that same endpoint. We also have the ability within Tanium to be able to deploy. So if I go to our package gallery and I'll look at software packages that are created, I can filter here on Deep Instinct, and you can see that there's a Deep Instinct package that's created. I have the ability to send that content out to targeted groups. So I could say every endpoint that doesn't have it, install it. I've since upgraded the agent on the endpoints. And so now that's why it says 3 are install eligible, because this is an older version. But basically you can update this package that allows you to continuously be targeting every endpoint that doesn't have the agent. So you can make sure that your protection is set up and is there and is available. But the Deep Instinct side, once the install is done, it's a matter of just adding a little flag at the end of the installation that says, hey, Deep Instinct, you're being installed on an endpoint that also has Tanium. And so from that perspective, we want you to communicate again and pass these alerts. Now, I want to take just a moment to mention why Tanium chose Deep Instinct. We not only believed in the partnership so much that we actually stopped leveraging our own prevention AV solution that we as a company use on our own laptops, and we went with Deep Instinct as well. So we are truly drinking our own champagne, if you will. We're leveraging Deep Instinct as our solution of choice to do prevention on our Windows and Mac systems as well. So the partnership was chosen because we evaluated multiple vendors to see who we wanted to partner with for that prevention piece. And Deep Instinct kept rising to the top. They had near zero false positives. They had others that we were evaluating would take 20 to 30 updates a day, whereas Deep Instinct, as was mentioned earlier, they update their D-brain or their data that gets passed down the endpoint, update it 2 to 3 times a year. So if you're in an air-gapped environment or you have areas where you want to make sure that you're still protected, even though there may be reasons that the daily updates aren't available to you, Deep Instinct's a great solution for that. But more so than that, I just see it as the next evolution in the prevention. We saw that several years ago, everyone had DAT files, and it was like checking against an existing file, and you had to make sure you got those updated because there were always new ones coming out. And then it went in a better direction by going to machine learning, and machine learning was the natural next evolution in being able to thwart the adversary. But they're continuing to get better and do more things to get around that type of defense. And so I think the deep learning is truly the next evolution in being able to do the prevention piece. And so the understanding of what the difference is between a stop sign and a yield sign, but not only that, the stop sign might have a limb in front of it, or it might be knocked over and to be bent to one side, or maybe have stickers on it that's not specifically allowing you to see, yep, this is exactly what a stop sign looks like. So it has to be intelligent about the way it does things. And deep learning and the D brain within Deep Instinct is truly doing that, so much so that we believe so much in it that we are partnering with them from our prevention perspective to be able to leverage that for our overall combined EDR solution. All right, so I will go ahead and pause there and stop sharing, and we'll go with any questions that someone may have.
Yeah, so we have a, can you guys hear me? Coming off mute here. We have a question from David H. Says, we seem to be adding ever increasing number of background processes, and I realize that this has several functions. What impact does this have on the individual PC overhead?
Yep, great question. So I can answer the Tanium aspect of the client and give reasonings why I think Tanium is such a powerful solution in that regard. We use less than 1% CPU overall when there's certain actions that are asked to be done, like when you tell the endpoint patch, then that's activity is going to take work, but you do that in off hours, patch windows, those type of things. But overall, the agent itself takes less than 1% CPU, less than a meg of memory. It's very, very small in the size of what it does. Okay. Now, the other aspect of it is we make endpoint agents better because we're able to help you reduce that agent bloat. So you might be able to replace 2, 3, 4 agents that are existing today, along with their infrastructure, the support contracts, on the problems that may pop up with it, down to 1 agent. And so that alone helps really reduce the amount of overhead that goes on the endpoint. But I know also Deep Instinct has a very small footprint as well.
And I'll speak to that if that's where the question was. We were also less than 1% designed for for that exact thing. I mean, we know that agent fatigue, a lot of that is because of resources they use. So we obviously, part of the proof of value that we usually do or demo, we show this when we ingest massive amounts of malware at one time. We'll see a spike, typically of 5 to 10% CPU. Every competitor that we see that we're going against in that scenario, and I've been against, against a bunch of them, typically a spike to 40 and 50 and even more with that same ingest. So big difference in what we're doing with CPU, as well as not preventing that malware from ever landing, which they do allow. So very big difference on CPU.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Believe it or not, that was the only question that was posed here in the chat. So, we'll give some folks some time. Maybe we'll stage fright to ask some questions. But so David H., we appreciate you breaking the ice here. Other folks on the line, feel free to type a question in the chat. But while we do still have 13 minutes or so here until the top of the hour, I figure between Patrick, Matt, Derek, and Jonathan, from seeing each other's presentations and just kind of having this demo just happen, anything else on your mind? Anything else you'd like to bring up to the group as some additional benefits and advantages of this partnership and these solutions?
Well, I'll start out real quick, and I know I've been talking a lot, so I'll make this comment and then I'll shut up and let everyone else add value. But I think the last 2 years has really proven that with COVID and the work from home initiatives and people being anywhere, the ability to see what's going on your endpoints, ask questions, are they patched? Are they vulnerable? Do they have these vulnerabilities? The ability to answer those questions quickly, but then pivot and take action to patch that endpoint, even if they're sitting at a Starbucks, if it's an emergency patch or if something needs to be done. The ability to see it and then pivot on it, no matter where they are, has been huge for us, because we've had customers come to us and go, we're begging people to get on VPN to open their laptops and hop on the network so we can patch them, because they're just connecting to cloud services and never getting on the corporate network, if you will, and they're never able to get patched. And so in that regard, Tanium has a solution that will allow you to do that for those endpoints with visibility and patching no matter where they are.
Yeah, and I would add on our front. I mean, I think everybody on this call, I'm certain that everybody loses some sleep over cybersecurity, but I think it's healthy to have healthy paranoia. And I know there's a lot of times that even today, we're seeing customers with next gen products. I mean, some upper right quadrant MQ products that are using us in big facilities to increase their efficacy on stopping and preventing from ever landing, and reducing false positives. It's still using that EDR functionality on that product. So we see some people supplementing their existing next gen offering to even get better with us. And then we see a lot of people that's just saying, hey, I'm using legacy tools. I can get better at endpoint protection. But I think just to encourage everyone to just have that healthy paranoia and give us an opportunity to show what we can do in comparison to what you may or may have today.
Excellent. We got another question here from Xavier R. What about managed services, MDR? Well, that's kind of where XenTegra comes into play. So in partnership with both Tanium and Deep Instinct, we can offer fully managed services in that respect. Good question. You can reach out to me after the fact. Happy to help. Any other questions?
No.
All right, we got another one here.
I just wanted to say thanks again to everybody for joining. Again, I cover the Southeast and work very closely with Darren. I see there's quite a few clients throughout the country, but specifically in Florida where I am. If you have any questions, we'd love to take this further, for a second demo, or even we're always happy to do proof of concepts. So don't hesitate to reach out to Darren or myself. And again, thank you all.
We have another question here though, Matt. So I'm going to cut you off. From David H., follow-up question. Speaking of upper right quadrant, does this have a Gartner review and where does it fall?
Great question. So I mentioned those companies earlier that created new Gartner quadrants. And I'll tell you, Nutanix, where I came from, when they defined hyperconvergence, it was about 3 years after Gartner acknowledged that was a new thing before the quadrant was released. We're 5 months of being acknowledged from Gartner of this new concept of converged endpoint management. So I would suspect in the coming 2 to 3 years, you'll see a new quadrant, but it takes time. They've acknowledged it. The quadrant will come.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from anyone else? I see some familiar names here on the attendee list. I know some of you folks aren't this quiet.
Must be eating.
Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, we appreciate everyone's attention. Matt, Jonathan, Derek, Patrick, thank you guys for jumping on. Hope everybody found this time valuable. If you have any questions around the Grubhub voucher, if you didn't get the email, just reach out to me. I'll connect you with the folks in our marketing department. We'll make sure you get that taken care of as soon as possible. Be on the lookout for more communication and updates on the XenTegra.com website. We do a lot of stuff like this, not just in the user group type of setting, but also in the form of hands-on workshops, boot camps. We do podcasts across all of our strategic vendors and technology partners. And just follow us, and I'm sure you'll be seeing some more content like this soon. So thank you for everyone. Good to see y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.